Hola a todos y bienvenidos a esta edición muy especial de En Vivos de Behavioral Pills. Como verán, no estamos en nuestro setting habitual cuando recibo a los invitados para hacer entrevistas, sino que ahora ha sido al revés. Yo he sido entrevistado por una de las personas que más respeto y admiro en el mundo de Behavioral Design. Su nombre es Yu-Kai Chou. Él es el creador del modelo de la herramienta llamada Octalysis y autor del libro Actionable Gamification, que es uno de los libros que más recomiendo leer a todas las personas que les interesa el tema de Behavioral Design, Gamification específicamente. Y tuve la suerte de ser invitado a su, digamos, plataforma. Él tiene en este momento algo que se llama el Octalysis Prime. Lo voy a dejar en los comentarios de este video el link para que puedan explorarlo un poquito más. Yo soy parte de su comunidad de Octalysis Primers, como nos llamamos, que somos personas que aprendemos directamente de él, llevamos, digamos, sus videos, su contenido, y nos ayuda mucho para desarrollar nuestras habilidades de diseño y comportamiento. Y me invitó un día a tener una entrevista y conversar un rato acerca del trabajo que vengo desarrollando como Behavioral Designer aquí en Perú. Entonces, sin ir más lejos, los quiero dejar ya con la entrevista. Notarán que estoy sumamente contento. Este es un momento muy importante para mí. Me encanta poder compartirlo con ustedes, y unas gracias a Yu-Kai no solamente por el espacio, sino además porque esta entrevista en realidad es una entrevista entre comillas como privada, es decir, está en la plataforma para la cual los que, digamos, pagamos la suscripción mensual tenemos acceso a ella, pero me la brindó para poder compartirla con todos ustedes. Así que espero que les encante. Hablamos de un poco de todo, de temas de mi carrera, cómo comencé como psicólogo, cómo entro al mundo de Behavioral Design, y hablamos acerca de ciertas herramientas, y por ahí salen algunos tips interesantes que les pueden interesar. Así que, sin más, los dejo con este video y nos vemos muy pronto en una siguiente entrevista que tengo ahí muy pendiente con nuevas personas para un siguiente Behavioral Pills. Y antes de ir con el video, no se olviden que ya tenemos la página web de Behavioral Pills. Solo ingresen a www.behavioralpills.com y ahí van a poder encontrar una serie de pills que les podrán ayudar a seguir aprendiendo de Behavioral Design. En esta entrevista vamos a hablar mucho sobre el Octalysis, y ahí tenemos un pill específicamente diseñado para explicar en qué consiste esa herramienta, cosa que no te pierdas de nada. Dicho eso, vámonos con el video.
Hello, Octalysis Primers. Today, we're going to have a really exciting interview with one of our own OP members, Carlos Hoyos Brown, who is actually also an OP member, but he has a lot of interesting background in terms of learning the Octalysis from applying it as a psychologist and also a behavioral designer. Welcome, Carlos.
Hi, Yu-Kai. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm really excited and glad to share my experience and talk about something that's I've been so passionate about in these last years, actually.
Great to have you here. So why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, I'm Peruvian. I'm a Peruvian psychologist. I studied here in Peru, my psychology degree. But ever since I finished the career, and even though while I was studying it, I was very interested in many things that now I understand a lot better from my experience working on this. And it's like, I've always been interested in human behavior in general. So I started working not as a clinical psychologist, but as a social psychologist. So I always work in what now is known as consumer behavior, right? Market research, doing different type of studies for many companies. And I've been working in that like for 13 years until now. So I would say I have quite a bit of understanding on consumer behavior. But like 4 or 5 years ago, I actually felt this need to find something else in terms of what do I do with the insights I'm actually recovering from my interviews and whatever. And that's when I stumbled upon actually, and this is a very funny story. Your book, Actionable Gamification, was actually the first book I ever read, like related to behavioral design in my career. And that book led me to another book, like you talk about like Nudge or Predictably Irrational, Dan Ariely and those kind of authors. So that was like falling through a rabbit hole. It just, one book just took me to the other, and like 4 to 5 years later, now I'm a behavioral designer. Like I've done a lot of projects on this, and I really enjoy this work because I have found like this meaning on what it is that why did I study psychology, right? To actually help people to change behaviors that they want to change and make life a lot more like fun and more engaging, but in a good way. Because I felt like before behavioral design, I didn't actually manage that. So behavioral design for me is like this this matrimony between psychology and social sciences and everything we learn about human behavior with design, right? Like solving problems, solving issues. So behavioral design for me is like the perfect combination. And the Octalysis framework is actually one of my favorite tools. It's one of the main tools I actually use when I design. And I'm really glad to actually be here and talking about this, because that book was a very important part in this story, right, of how I ended up doing this. So yeah.
Out of all the ways to help people, what got you interested in psychology in the first place?
Well, that's a that's a very funny, not funny, but a very interesting question, because I think I've never thought about that in a long so many years. The thing is that I grew up in a psychology related family. My mother has been always a psychologist, and I remember when I was a little boy listening to the interviews she did, and she was also in market research. So it was a mixture of always being like connected to people, always being interested in understanding why, what is going on in why do they do this, etc. And like, I think maybe most psychologists have this, beginning story, right? That when I was at school, it was really easy to me to connect with friends, and they always came to me to talk about their problems and ask for advice and whatever. And it always came to me like really natural to just connect and empathize and understand what they're going through, and try without any training, just trying to be help them out. So I think that just naturally took me to psychology. Like, it was not difficult for me to choose my career. I was so clear from day one, right? So yeah, just helping people, that's it. It's not that much complicated when you think about it. It's just that need to help and be there for people.
And you have a psychology degree. Did you practice psychology in any, I guess, the psychology study? Just for instance, I studied international economics at UCLA as my undergrad, but I usually don't think of myself as an economist. I just have a degree in. How much did you do in terms of the traditional psychology route?
So I'm not, in terms of therapy and that kind of stuff, it's not something I do. I have to be honest, I am interested in actually at some point, trying it out, and maybe not being a therapist necessarily, but maybe going through that path at some point, maybe a little further on. But right now, I think I would say the same. I don't feel myself as a complete psychologist. That's why I like this term of behavioral designer, because normally I've always been like a rogue psychologist even from when I was studying. Why? Because psychology is a science. And I am very clear that I am not a scientist. I am not a behavioral scientist. I don't work with the idea of creating knowledge. I work with the idea of solving problems. And that's very important, because I have some, it's not that I don't get along with other psychologists, but not everyone is fan with the way some things are done, because normally psychology and science relies on very deep, scientific evidence. And what I didn't like about my upbringing as a psychologist was that I always felt I couldn't say, or I couldn't work with my own ideas. I always had to talk about or cite a reference, another author, before I say what I want to say. So that was really like frustrating for me, because I had so many things that I wanted to try, and I wasn't like trying to say I know a lot more than anybody else. I just wanted to try stuff. So I felt like in science, you're not always encouraged to innovate or to try new things. Like, you can do an experiment, but even if you design up an experiment, an intervention, you have to have this huge background on research on what have, past people done about this, what have you learned? And that is good, but I don't like that it could be so frustrating not to be able to do something. So as a psychologist, I don't feel like a psychologist. I feel more like a type of inventor, someone who wants to solve issues using psychology, using social sciences. But if you come at this point where you don't have all the evidence to say something, you just try. And that's what I liked about the Octalysis framework. It's like, it's so useful. It's so clear on how can you use it, that you don't actually need all that scientific background, that actually it is related to scientific background. And that was something I wanted to talk to you about, because I actually I've been studying the Octalysis framework and actually matching it with other frameworks and, psychology theory. And it's like, it actually matches. I don't know if that was like your big plan or you had it all figured out from the get-go, but my point is that from what I see, it's like you actually built something from your observation, your evidence, your knowledge and everything, but you don't need like 10 years of scientific research to bring a tool that is so useful and that you just learn and work on it during your practice.
Yeah, one thing I see in terms of a lot of science research is that there's a lot of things that need to be controlled, right? It's like, you can't just say, hey, I want to go out and try a brand new venture, new thing. It's like, well, everything has to be the same, but one small delta, to just perceive that one small delta makes a difference, right? And it is a bit slow. In terms of my background in Octalysis, again, I didn't have all this grand planning. Again, the reason a lot of people say, hey, the Octalysis shouldn't be called a gamification framework. It should be just, for everything, how the brain works. And at least I call it gamification no matter what, because all this insight was derived from studying how games work. And the reason why I think I was very lucky that studying games helps with how humans are motivated in general across the board is because if you think about most psychology studies, right? It's like a professor in a classroom with 100 undergrad students, right? And it's divided by half. And then again, like we say, like one group has a delta, the other group is a constant, control group. And then if the two groups have even like, 60% did this and then 40% didn't do it. It's like, oh, 60%, it's more than 40%. So this delta changes behavior, right? And if they can replicate that in other classrooms, then it's scientifically proven that this changes behavior. Again, even though it doesn't change everyone's behavior, but it changes more people's behavior than otherwise. But if you look at a game, each game is like a petri dish of hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of test subjects voluntarily changing their behavior based on how the game rule is, right? So it's, you have a bit more scarcity and people change their behavior, have a bit more unpredictability. And sometimes the rule changes and everyone gets upset, or some people play a game for 3 months like crazy and then they don't want to touch it ever again. And then some games people can play for 10 years and they still love it. So I just feel like studying each game is a peer environment on motivation in terms of how people are driven. So that became a really useful tool. In fact, I also have talked to a gentleman who got his PhD in psychology, I think about 30 years ago. And he was at the beginning first explaining to me how there was a time when it's all about Skinnerian psychology. And then that was overthrown and it was the self-determination theory. And then this, and I'm like, in my head, I was thinking, well, it wasn't necessarily overthrown. It was just, they're first talking about the black hat motivation and then the white hat and then intrinsic. So I talked to, and then this gentleman was very fascinated about Octalysis, and he asked me questions for 3 hours. And it seemed like kind of like what you're saying too. It also addressed and clarified some things that at least haven't been publicly solved in the psychology world. So I was, again, feel very blessed and excited about seeing, hey, my little creation actually stands firm. And I don't know if you might have seen, if you go to Google Scholar and you search for the word Octalysis, you'll find about, I think, 1,700 PhD thesis academic journals about applying the Octalysis in different fields and like healthcare, management, quality management. So I think, again, this is not a master plan. This is like, I was intellectually curious. I'm like, hey, let's draw some things. Let's put a chart. It's like, hey, I think when it actually formed, I did feel the elegance of it, about how, you know, the even the corners, white hat, right brain, the left bottom is black hat, extrinsic. These things all come together. I did feel like it's a really elegant tool, but I didn't know how far it will go and at which point it'll hit its limitations. Yeah, so that's an interesting background of my experience with why the Octalysis stands. Yeah, so tell me, what kind of projects do you work on when you do behavioral design projects?
Well, yeah, that's a very big question. I mean, it just goes wherever it has to go, to be honest. I mean, wherever there's behavior, there's a chance to apply behavioral design, because basically what we do is identify a behavioral problem. And that could be anything. That could be like, it's, for example, if we were talking about a company, you can have behavioral problems related to sales, right? So let's say like digital, right? Your platform isn't selling as you're expected. People are not clicking where you want people to click. People are not responding to, I mean, we work with emails, with, landing pages, with, I've even worked like in projects related to operations. Like, for example, when people have to pay you, right? You have to charge, you're right. So the payment process, and people are like, oh, why are people not paying with credit card, for example? And you have a behavioral problem. Yeah, at the end, it's an operations problem, but it's based on someone not doing something that you should be doing, right? So I've been working with HR issues, right, for culture. Actually, I built an onboarding experience for the company I'm working right now using the Octalysis framework. I've worked with education. My own classes that I teach on behavioral design are built on gamified experience using the Octalysis framework, for example, and based on identifying behavioral problems. Like, for example, if people nowadays, you teach a class online and people don't even turn on their cameras, and that's very frustrating for a teacher, right? And I actually managed to teach a class where 80% of the cameras were on all during the whole 6 sessions of 3 hours each, right? Based on gamification. So yeah, I mean, that question can just go anywhere. It's so amazing how many different projects we've been able to work on. And for me, basically, I always say, like, when people ask me, like, what do I use? How do I work with these problems? I always fall back on 2 tools specifically. That I always say they're like my hammer and my screwdriver, right? In my toolbox. And it's the COMBI model. It's very similar to the BMAP model you have on your videos on the OP Island. It's like the very close cousin. It's a really interesting model, and the Octalysis framework for me, it's like huge to I'm really sure that many psychologists or social scientists that read your book might have that same feeling that I had. And it was like, so for example, in psychology, you have many theories and you've addressed some of them, like, for example, the Dechi and Ryan, you also have like McLeland talking about motivation. And well, we have many Maslow's, the Maslow's pyramid and whatever. So you have a lot of like many different authors that have like talked about bits and pieces that are scattered around, but no one integrated it. And that was very frustrating for me as a psychologist. When I finished my career, like you end, like a 6-year program, and then you're like, what do I do? Like, what am I good at? You just have all this information, but you don't have tools in terms of social psychology. You don't have tools. You're not like, now I go out and I do this and that. So having that Octalysis framework, like for young psychologists nowadays, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to show them, now you're able to solve these kind of problems in this world with the information you have and with the tools that, you know, like professionals like Yu-Kai Chou and Susan Michi and other professionals are building tools so that you can use them to try to solve these problems. So you're not out in the wild trying to survive like maybe I felt at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, I'm really glad we have this right now, because it helps us a lot to diagnose the problem and to design a solution. So yeah, that's how I use it right now.
Yeah, you mentioned one example about getting, I think, Zoom attendees to open up their camera and feel more social. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of our audience would love to know, how did you do that? And what core drives did you use?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not like one specific intervention to have people turn their cameras on. Basically what I did was, so I teach this course, and the course has the grades. In Peru, we have grades from 0 to 20, right? And the thing is that when I teach the course, I have this optional gamified experience where basically it's like let's say like an RPG, right? So you have these classes, these characters you can choose, and each class, and I build all the lore behind it. You know, I give them this experience, like all the background of each class, you know, try to give it a little bit of core drive 1, right? Like a little bit of meaning, epic meaning, like you're doing this adventure, right? So the thing is that if you choose a class and you want to play the game, you have these quests or these missions during the sessions that are basically very diverse, and they give you points like coins or whatever that you can later on redeem for points, like real points for your qualifications. So what I do basically is I say, this course, if you don't play the game, you can approve the course, you can pass the course, but you're just going to pass like with a 15. That is like like an okay score, right? But you're not going to be awesome. You're not going to be like, you know, like top of the class. And what I also do is that if you actually end up with 18 to 20, I have this badge like related to a business I have here in Peru, and you're like a champion, right? So it actually transcends the course. And I post on LinkedIn that you're like a great student or whatever. So my point here is that I build all this, you know, gamified experience, and students want to be the best and they want to compete, and you know, there is interaction. So one of the quests or one of the ways to earn like easy coins is just to keep your, you know, keep your video camera on during the class. And I have my assistants that actually like track people that are actually with the camera on. And then you also have other quests like participate a little bit, like ask questions or just, you know, answer questions from other people from the audience. So it sounds like really simple and kind of, you know, dumb, but it actually works. I mean, and it's not because like I always hear like when you talk about the importance that points have to have meaning behind it. It's not like I just didn't do a course and say, oh, if you have the camera, just put on, I'll give you some points. If you know, it's not like that. It's everything is integrated. You know, people actually want to not everyone, but people normally want to excel, and they want that icon, that badge I'm giving you, not because only of the badge, because it's related to something that's valuable to them. So yeah, I mean, that's like in a nutshell. That it's a little bit more complicated in terms of how I designed it, but it has a lot of core drive 1. It has a lot. I use a lot of white hat here. It's not obligatory to play the game, obviously. Like one of your first lessons, you know, it has to be voluntary. It has to be fun. So it's more white hat, it's more core drive 1, it's more development and accomplishment, you know, because you earn the points, you want to get, you know, these grades for you. A little bit maybe of core drive 4, you know, with earning the points by themselves and feeling like you're actually capturing something. And yeah, I mean, but the whole Octalysis has a little bit of core drive 5, a little bit of core drive 3. And I actually put a little bit of core drives. I love core drive 7. It's maybe one of my favorite core drives. So like that surprise elements are scattered around the course. But yeah.
For those who are a little bit new to Octalysis, core drive 7 is unpredictable and curiosity. And what's really exciting about it is it's on the right bottom of the icon, which means it's what we call right brain core drive, which I always make disclaimer, doesn't necessarily mean it's geographically on the right side of the brain, but it symbolically represents our emotional brain. And so it's intrinsic motivation. Brains enjoy or engage with it, but it's on the bottom. So it's black hat. We feel a little bit out of control. And so on the lighter sense, it's like, well, I want to finish a book or movie, being intellectual curious. On the heavy side of it, you know, you do have gambling addiction. But one example I like to give a lot for this right bottom core drive 7 is that, let's say you want to go to bed at 10 p.m., but then you binge watch Netflix till 4 a.m. Right. And so your brain enjoys it. It's right brain, intrinsic, but you feel out of control. It's black hat. But it is a very useful tool because, number one, it does generate delight. If obviously, if you don't go too heavy in the gambling obsession, but it does create delight. And so, but it also creates more urgency, right? So it's nice to have something where people act relatively quickly on something and they want to come back more. You can see immediate results. And there's this intrinsic component to it that people are, you know, you see engagement and laughter on people's faces. So Core Drive 7 is oftentimes a really nice tool to have in many type of implementations.
Completely agree. My favorite, definitely.
Yeah. So you mentioned the COMB model, COMB, and you said it's a very close cousin to the BMAP model. And for those who don't know, BMAP is BJ Fogg behavioral equals motivation, ability, and a prompt. And we're not going to go too detailed to that. There's a video on OP about it, but why don't you tell us more about COMB?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that, like I said, it's like a very close cousin. It's very, very similar, let's say, if you can imagine it, right? Mm-hmm. So the BMAP says you have to have the ability, the motivation, and the trigger or prompt, right? So the same thing applies to COMB, but the difference is that what COMB does is the ability element, it kind of divides it into two, right? The C of the COMB, the C is capability, and the O is called opportunity. So while BJ Fogg just talks about ability, like in general, like the behavior has to be easy, the COMB model says, okay, true, but it doesn't only has to be easy. There are like two elements you have to take in consideration. The capability is related to all the internal factors or elements that help or become barriers to do the behavior, right? So let's say like knowledge, abilities, your skills, you know, your predispositions, your attitudes towards something, everything that's related to me as a human being, as an individual. Like, let's say, for example, if I'm not, you know, a native web user, it's going to be difficult for me to buy something online because I'm not used to it. I don't have the ability to actually do it. But then you have to consider the opportunity. That's the other side of the coin. That means is related to all of the external factors or elements that help or make or put barriers on the behavior. So maybe I am a web native, right? So I can easily buy whatever you give me on a platform. But if the UX is wrong, if the UX is not working right, if there is like technical issues, if the servers are not working correctly, the behavior is not going to happen because I'm going to have external factors that are not helping my behavior. So this is very important when I diagnose, especially for business. I have this slide where what I do is I put the C, the O, and the M, right, of the COMB model. And what I say to business is, why is it important to use the COMB model? Because depending on where is the problem, like in the capability, opportunity, and motivation, your strategy as a company is going to be completely different, right? Let's say if your diagnostics tells you that the problem with the behavior you're addressing is not a matter, let's say, for example, sales, right? And people are like, oh, we will have to lower the price. Let's do some, like sales and put like 50% off. And the problem was not motivation. Like that is clearly motivation. You want to motivate people to buy, just because of the bargain. And you actually found out that people are not buying because they don't even know that the product exists, because I don't know, they're not receiving the advertisements, whatever. Your strategy is not about doing, promotions. It's actually about checking out what your communications are doing. Are your emails working? Are they correctly designed, etc.? Or if your problem is not that, and it's just that people are not able to work on your web because it crashes every 5 minutes, and that is very usual. So my point here is that I have this slide where I tell people, like, if your problem is capability, normally you have to address, let's say, communications, education, and stuff related to having the skills and the information you need to do the behavior. If your problem is an opportunity, normally you have to look at your infrastructure, your data warehouses, you have to look at your UX, and you have to look at other departments of your company. And if your problem is motivation, like the behavior is really easy to do, but you don't have the motivation, yeah, you may have to look at marketing, you may have to look at product design, maybe people are just not interested in your product, and that's it. So I love this model because it's really easy to see where the problem is and where to actually address the issue. And yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, Combi and Octalysis for me are like, they have never let me down. I've always managed to get something out of the diagnostic area in every behavior, in every project I've worked on. So that's why they're like my favorite tools, because they always work. You always get something out of it. So yeah, that would be, like, in a nutshell, what Combi actually means, right?
Yep. There's a saying, it's your bread and butter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Because there are so many models. There are so many. I mean, like, models and tools that are everywhere. And I try to teach every single one of them, but actually I don't use everyone, like, all the time. They're like very specific tools for very specific moments. For example, the BMAP for me is very powerful, but now, like, at the beginning I used it a lot more, but now I use the BMAP especially when I have to design habits. For example, when I have to work on habit formation, or some, like, very important, like, continuous behavior, like, has to be repetitive, I use the BMAP, because the BMAP helps me with the prompt element, right? You don't need a prompt for every single behavior you do. I hope BJ Fogg is not mad for what I'm saying, but you don't actually need a prompt for everything. So, or maybe it's not that important. Maybe you do need it, but it's not that critical. For habits, it's, like, totally critical. You cannot build a habit without a prompt. That is not going to happen. So BMAP is very strong for me as a habit building tool, for example.
Yep. And at what point, I'll ask you about the Octalysis part too, but at what point did you decide that, hey, Combi is going to be your thing, the thing that you'll use most often? How did you come to that realization?
Just trying. It's like, it's just try and error. I started out with BMAP actually at the beginning. It was the first one I knew about, and it kind of works, but then you have this feeling, like, again, like, you're like, I mean, where does the trigger go? Where does a prompt go? It's like, and you kind of struggle with that. And then when someone taught me about the Combi model, and the other thing with the Combi model is that, scientifically speaking, it has a lot of validation. So when I go out to other fellow behavioral scientists and I say Combi, I'm not questioned by anyone. Everyone knows what Combi is, and you don't have to struggle with that, because it's not like, oh, but according to this guy. Because, to be honest, in the scientific universe, in terms of psychology, I mean, this is going to be so, like, not a good thing to say, but we don't really know that much. I mean, everything is a theory. Everything, like you were mentioning, like, for example, if you study the history of psychology, it's just like one theory or one theorist trumping the next one, right? So everyone's like, yeah, there was behavioralism, and everyone's like, oh, let's be behavioralists. And then it came out with the cognitivism, and it was like, oh no, behavioralism sucks, now we have to do cognitivism. And now it's not cognitivism, and now we're back to behavioralism. So we're not really sure of what we're doing. Like, I don't know, it's nothing is really, like, it's not like the normal sciences, right? Like physics and stuff, like, so you don't have those problems when you talk about Combi. You don't have authors saying, no, don't use that. So yeah, I mean, it just became useful. It just helps. And maybe tomorrow I figure out another tool. And yeah, and to be honest, I don't use Combi as exactly it is in the textbook. I have my version of Combi. Like, I feel like I'm in a garage and I'm just, grabbing the model and taking out what works and putting, like, for example, when I analyze the M in Combi, in the motivation, I don't use what Susan Michi actually says we have to use to understand motivation. I use the Octalysis. So I put the Octalysis framework inside the Combi framework. So it's like a Frankenstein. It works for me, but maybe for other people, it's not like that cool. So yeah, it's just a matter of usefulness.
Yeah, that's something very similar. When I talk about BMAP, I also say, motivation, the M part is really about the 8 core drives, right? And then the ability and the prompt, those are more specific implementations of those things. So I think how you'd use the Octalysis is very appropriate here. And and actually what's really interesting is I talk about college. I went to UCLA, I studied, and Psychology 10, Psych 10 was actually, I think, the most interesting class for me. I read the textbook from cover to cover. I rarely touch textbooks. I've bought so many textbooks, I didn't touch a single page, but I read it from cover to cover, and I did get an A+ in it, and it was very fascinating. Yeah. But at the time, I thought if I majored in psychology, I had to become a clinical psychologist and get a PhD, and I was more interested in business, which is why I went the economics route. But one thing that struck me as very interesting, which is what you're bringing up here, is when I was reading through the textbook, I realized there's so many things that end up in the sentence like, but scientists don't know why people do this, or why this happens, or why we sleep, or things like that. And I'm like, wow, like, when I grow up, I usually think the textbook will explain everything, right? Everything's in the textbook. Scientists figure out everything. It's just we're, as students, we're not knowledgeable enough. And it's like, wow, the experts in the world don't even understand why we do these everyday behaviors. And so it made me realize, wow, this field is very much not fully understood, and maybe there's opportunity to have more insights in that field. I remember I didn't think about creating the Octalysis framework at the time, but I just had this really interesting feeling that this field seems to be still in the exploration, the frontier, Wild West phase in actuality. But later on in life, I actually learned something more interesting about also other hard sciences. I heard something about our understanding of math or physics doubles every 2 or 3 years or something like that. And I'm like, wow, like I thought, again, we probably know like 70-80% of what we need to know. Maybe not all of the vast universe, but yeah, it's like, and every year, maybe we'll understand like 1 or 2% more, but knowing that it doubles, like, wow, that means we totally didn't understand anything 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And also back to the being conservative about things. I heard a saying that, in the world of physics, even, it's not like the new theories come out that's supposed to be better and they beat out the old theory. Like everyone agrees that, oh, the new theory is better, so everyone moves. They say the old scientists need to die first, and then the young ones who believe in the new theory become the older elders, and now that becomes the dominant theory, which is always strange because I always think that physics is about math. It's like, how can you be like, no, mine is better. No, mine is like, it should just explain the universe and support by math, right? But no, it's just basically people who grew up with one theory just stick with it, and it's very interesting on that point. So you talk about Combi is very validated. You don't want to just say, hey, this guy created this thing, so I want to use this. But obviously, when you talk about Octalysis, it's totally this guy that created this thing. So why Octalysis?
Well, I have to come back to the idea, what I said before. I'm a rogue psychologist. I don't care, really. I don't care. I mean, and this is
pragmatic.
I am very pragmatic. I am very pragmatic. I really don't care. I mean, for me, scientific evidence is something we have to use in our favor, not something we have to treat it like a Bible, right? It's I mean, we have to be very careful of how we treat our sciences, because the reality of everything is that we don't really know. I mean, because the scientific proof we have on human behavior is, and there's a very big criticism right now going on, that it's based on experiments on like a very specific, like gender oriented, like race oriented, like country oriented, let's say specimens, right? Like we can't generalize on behavior because, like UCLA professor did a study in their, psychology class and whatever. So it's interesting. I'm not saying it's not, but there's a very big replicability crisis going on right now in the social sciences. So my answer to this is not like nihilism. It's not like, oh, we don't know anything and whatever. I just use whatever scientific evidence gives me, and whatever it doesn't, I don't care. I'm just going to use it. To be honest, if the Octalysis framework, like after 1 or 2 weeks of using it, I didn't find it useful, I wouldn't be using it anymore. It's not like, oh no, Yu-Kai Chou said it's important. No, I mean, it's awesome. It really works. So yeah, actually, you're right. I have been in that situation where I talk about Octalysis framework and someone comes out and say, oh yeah, but there's no scientific evidence behind this. Or who is Yu-Kai Chou? What doctorate does he have? And it's like, I don't know, man. It just works. I mean, I don't care how you think about it. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm not a master. I don't have a master's degree on behavioral science. I've been thinking about at some point taking it, but I'm not interested anymore because I learn more from doing. And what frustrates me a lot more about my career and being a psychologist, this frustrates me a lot, is that I feel like with physics and chemistry and other sciences, we're putting people on the moon. We're like doing all these advances. We're creating new materials to construct with. We're like progressing as a human race, and I'm not really sure what has psychology brought to the table at this point, right? And that really frustrates me. It's like, what inventions, what things have been created thanks to our psychology insight, other than therapy. I mean, therapy is very important. And if we look at like the health part of psychology, there's a lot that has been done there, right? Like helping a lot of people with we understand a lot more about mental illness and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not going to go there. There has been improvements there, but other than that, like in our social day-to-day issues. So I'm quite frustrated because I don't see those inventions. I don't see those creations thanks to these, big psychologist theorists. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite like angry at that. So again, my answer to someone who says, hey, we have this model that helps us, build more engaging behaviors, and you can build gamified experiences a lot better and a lot more like well done. And if someone comes out and say there's no scientific evidence, I really don't care. I mean, and my answer to this, and when you were mentioning about video games, is that I actually think there's a lot of evidence in video gaming behavior, but it's just that not enough scientists have actually had the time to study it and replicate and do all their experiments. But that doesn't mean that the behavior is not actually working, right? So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, again, I'm a rogue psychologist at this point. I really don't care about scientific evidence as that much. I don't think we're actually going to be able to understand human behavior like completely as we want it, because as soon as we understand something, let's say, for example, the pandemic, right? We thought we understood human behavior. We thought we understood a lot of things about how we behave. And then this pandemic came and everything just changed, right? So it's like a very big turntable. And now we have this war going on, and it's going to change a lot of things again. So I don't really mind not knowing everything. That's not my issue. My issue is not applying that in things that really help humankind, right? And like something palpable. That's what frustrates me.
Yeah. I remember many years ago, there was this kid who wanted to, apparently he wanted to attack my work and many other people in the field's work to become famous. Because at the beginning, he's a critic, which is fine. You can criticize anything, right? But then ends up he writes on a gamification. He's like, gamification is a scam and blah, blah, blah. These people are absurd, like scientifically absurd. But then he writes on a gamification blog, I realized. So it's like, I guess he's just trying to be famous by criticizing like more established people. But I remember I wrote a response, and later on he said that response like ruined his career or something like that. But one statement, because I literally, like, he wrote a little ebook, okay? And it's $1 on Amazon, and it just had my name in the title. Like, people like Yu-Kai Chou and Andres Marshevsky are like incorrect to the point of absurdity, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, if you're gonna criticize me with a whole ebook and put me on the title, and let me break it down then and study if there's actually validity, right? So I bought it. I'm like, this is gonna be the most going to be the most expensive $1 you make from, and I literally like almost paragraph by paragraph, I broke it down like this thing doesn't make sense. This thing doesn't make, this is like a funny argument. And so afterward he said like, now everyone's laughing at him. But I remember I did write one sentence that I think people don't like. It's very similar to what you said. It's like, well, honestly, I don't care. I mean, it turns out that there's a lot of scientific backing behind it. You know, I'm in my book, I cite, you know, I think 200-300 sources. A lot of them are you know, academic sources. And but at the end of the day, I don't really care if it's scientific or not, as long as it works. As long as I can solve problems for my clients and for my own problems, I see it works. I don't care if it's not scientific. And then some people are a little bit upset at that for that one sentence, because, you know, it could sound maybe a little arrogant, but it's true. You know, like I'd rather have something be very, very useful as opposed to very, very scientific. Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And just to give you a little bit of insight on that, there is such thing called the motivation matrix. It was built by an author named last name Forbes, I think David Forbes. And basically what he did was bring all these scattered information about motivation, and he built like his framework on like his equivalent of core drives. And if you analyze it, I actually have analyzed it, compared it with Octalysis. It's very similar. I mean, it's not the same. I think he's not putting some other types of motivations. But my point here is that what you're trying to do is in the Octalysis framework, you're not throwing out a theory, right? You're bringing different bits and pieces that are everywhere around psychology and just putting it in one like box and saying, if we want to talk about this, you can talk about these and these others. So this guy has this paper. It was published by the American Psychology Association, like the top of the top in terms of science in psychology. I can share it with you and the OP members. It's a very good paper. I really strongly recommend it. And at some point, I actually think it's a very good validation to how and why Octalysis framework works, because it's very relatable. It's very, there are many points that are similar. So I think that can help you with these kinds of, you know, even though if we don't care, but still they're annoying, right? So you can shove these papers to anyone who's like, oh yeah, there's no scientific evidence.
I have enough of those actual evidence, but it's
awesome.
It's just not interesting to spend a lot of time like justifying that part of it. It's just like I get tired of people trying to argue what's the definition of gamification for long periods of time. I mean, if you want to talk about it for, you know, a few minutes to say like, oh, this word shouldn't be there, you know, that's fine. But I see people 6 months, for a year, 2 years, they're still arguing about the fine definition of gamification. I'm like, hey, I just want to use that knowledge and solve problems. And actually this connects to like a joke. I think this is from a speech from a Jesse Schell, game designer at one of the G summits back in the day. And he was saying that one time he was invited to a tea party by psychology professors. And he says, oh, these people are like study psychology, right? They know how to engage the brain. So their party must be the most engaging, most exciting, most fun, rad party, right? Because they understand how to make things fun and engaging to the brain. And he says, when he got there, it's like the most boring party ever imaginable. Party. Yeah. And he's just like, that knowledge about how to engage the brain isn't applied.
Yes. That is so true. I had this feeling that you were going to get there because I mean, and not only that, I mean, like, for example, there's a huge criticism, like psychologists and these experts on behavior, they share all our knowledge in very boring, like very dense papers, academic papers. Like you said, we should be like the first to be able to know how to share our knowledge in a way that is engaging, that a way that is, you know, interesting to consume and easy to understand. And no, we're so complicated. It's embarrassing at some point, really.
Yeah, I think the speaker, I think it's Jesse Schell, but I'm not going to say Jesse Schell said this now. He did clarify, I guess, obviously, because psychology PhDs are also very respectable in the work they do. We're like poking fun them a little bit, but he says it's because their intention is about how to get people to recover from, you know, mental illness, right? Recover from illness. They're not necessarily putting a lot of energy and effort into how to make things amazing, excitingly fun.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why we come and do our work in that. But I do remember there was that interesting moment. I had only told part of the story with that. I said, gentleman who got his PhD in psychology 30 years ago and was learning about the Octalysis. So for 3 hours, right, he was asking about it, but then he asked me like, oh, so where did I get my PhD? And I said, oh, I didn't get my PhD, and I have undergrad in economics. He's like, oh, okay. So which PhD taught you this framework? And I said, oh no, I just figured it out on my own. And he's like, oh, okay. And he obviously he didn't really fully believe that. So then he asked a lot of questions, and then after another hour, he said, oh, so did someone tell you there's these 8-core drives and just put it on an octagon? And I'm like, no, I just put it on an octagon. Like I studied games, right? And so like every 40 minutes to an hour, he'd like check again. It's like, where did I get this from? You know? And it just seemed like, at one point it's flattering, but it's also kind of like, I don't know. I feel like, why do you say that about me? It's like the flattering part is that his statement is almost like, this is so good that it's impossible that you created this, right? And so it's flattering because like, yeah, thank you for saying this is so good. But the semi-small sting is that, oh, so yeah, it's so good that I can't, because I don't have a PhD in psychology. I just can't come up with good ideas, I guess. Yeah, so that's a common thing. And but I think the nice thing is, as we do our work, people see that and see it works. And I think that's the big thing, right? We have a useful knowledge and we want to make an impact in the world.
Exactly. And you have to take into consideration, and I have many friends with PhDs and they're brilliant people, but I think that it is so difficult for them. And it's so, I've done a master's in business, for example, and it's not easy, right? So at some point I think you have to deal with this issue of, someone who's not been through this hell like I've been, being deserving all this recognition might be a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit sting for themselves, right? So I don't know, it's just an idea.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy ecosystem. People like kind of poking fun at each other, teasing, oh, mine's better, but still with some mutual, hopefully a good amount of mutual respect, right?
Yes.
I think you said you did prepare some slides. I don't know if you want to walk through some of that.
Yeah, sure. It's just a couple. I mean, I was thinking about whatever, and actually, this is the first one. Like I was talking about this motivational matrix. It was created like David Forbes, that's the name, on 2011. So this is something I wanted to show everyone related with the core drives of the Octalysis framework. So what Forbes did was analyze, and you can look at the paper again. I'm going to share it so you can check it out, and it has so many references. It talks about so many models. For me, it's like a very important paper for anyone who wants to understand motivation. It's not difficult to read. So he talks about these different elements or different ways that people are motivated by. So as you can see, it's really related or very easy to relate to the Octalysis framework, like security, empowerment, belonging, identity, engagement, nurturance, mastery, achievement, and esteem. So like if you look at it like this, it's a little bit more difficult maybe to understand. But if you look at it like this, what I did here was try to bring very the most relevant theorists or elements related to motivation, and just make that everyone finds themselves in the Octalysis framework. And this was really easy to build, and that's why I think Octalysis framework is so interesting for us psychologists, because it's kind of a tool to understand a little bit better all the information we have out there. So for example, when we talk about epic meaning, right? Core drive 1. Epic meaning, we're talking about purpose from Daniel Pink. We're talking about power from Macmillan. That's one of the theories, most respected theories on motivation. The self-actualization from Maslow himself. If we talk about accomplishment, we're talking about the achievement element from Forbes, the mastery from Forbes, the mastery from Pink, the competence from Ditchy and Ryan, the achievement element from McClellan. So what I did here was try to bring all, and this is like something I'm building in the way, right? So it really helps me to understand why these core drives are so powerful. This is not the first time we're talking about this, but it's really funny for me that, for example, I haven't been able to find many elements related to scarcity. So it's kind of like, I question myself, are we psychologists like biased in studying more social phenomenons, like the social influence element, where we can see there are a lot of people talking about social parts of that motivates us, and not talking enough about unpredictability and surprise and this sense of curiosity, other than empowerment by Forbes, that it's not exactly unpredictability, but I think we can, stretch it a little bit. Or scarcity itself. It's like, maybe, I mean, I'm not saying that we're not talking about scarcity as a concept, but I don't see motivational models talking or considering these black hat elements as much, right? And avoidance itself, I just put like the safety element from Maslow. It's kind of stretching it a little bit, right? So yeah,
absolutely is safety, right? You're avoiding danger, which is the feeling of safety.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you want to fill out the bottom stuff more for scarcity, definitely check out Robert Cialdini. Scarcity is one of his, I think, 5 or 6 main components that motivates people. And Robert Cialdini is very interesting because he wrote this book called Influence, a very, very famous book. But his background is also very pragmatic. He has a PhD in psychologist, and he went, quote unquote, undercover by he applied for a job at a used car salesmanship, and he applied for, I think, like raising donations or solar power stuff. And then he's learning all these tactics that work in the field. And he realized, a lot of these tactics that are working are based on scarcity, liking, about social norming. And then also, if you look at Daniel Kahneman, Richard Thaler in behavioral economics, you'll actually also see a bit more black hat extrinsic type of component, because economics is about transactions, right? It's about so
the loss aversion.
You'll see a lot of loss aversion, which is core drive A. You'll see the endowment effect, which is CD4. You'll see like how people deal with uncertainty, right? And that's CD7.
Exactly.
So I think if you study those fields of work, you'll be able to fill out the bottom of the octagon a little bit more robustly.
Well, my next project from this one is actually to relate. That's what we call like the psychology principles, or what we use later on nudges. And I completely agree. Maybe that is a lot more populated. And I want to build the same thing for Octalysis related to those issues. But what I was trying to do with this one specifically are like the theories, right? The like the official models, like, for example, Kahneman talks about these elements, but it's still like the dual process theory. It's not exactly about motivation itself. It's more like, how do we make decisions, right? So yeah, but yeah, it's a good point. I'm going to put some of that Cialdini elements on that point. But my point here is, or the main point here is, that the Octalysis framework is like this hub where everyone finds themselves. So even though the Octalysis model as itself, maybe, I mean, you mentioned that there are many other papers, but it didn't come from that analysis. It doesn't mean that it's not valid. And maybe that's why it's so useful, because at the end, it is really related to what many authors have been talking about in many years. And we're just finding everything come together in one very powerful tool.
Yeah. And I also say that I didn't invent everything of these 8 core drives. Each core drives, luckily, right, has all this study, academic journal, and Ryan Daichi, all those things that help us and me understand that core drive even more and how it works, right? I studied the games. I think one of the things that I feel like I'm at least from my own knowledge, I'm the first to derive, is that difference between white hat and black hat motivation. Intrinsic, extrinsic, ton of literature out there, right? Every core drive, there's literature out there, but the understanding of some motivation that makes people feel long-term inspired, but no urgency, and some motivation makes people feel urgent. I think there hasn't been this differentiation. Most studies like, hey, look, we did this experiment and people change their behavior. So yay, it changes behavior. And they don't really differentiate between those two. When we look at behavioral economics, it doesn't talk too much about why some people would sacrifice their lives for a higher purpose, right? But when we're talking about self-determination theory, it doesn't talk about why some people are addicted to gambling. So it is kind of separate in that, and hopefully I put in some original pieces of research, but I want to say it's not all like just, I just imagine this from my head. It is in a way merging all the, or a lot of the useful science out there, you know, sitting on the shoulder of giants and applying that into a system that is actionable, right? So it's like, okay,
Exactly.
It allows us to, we face this problem. All right, we face a problem, long-term motivation in a creative environment. Well, that means white hat motivation is a good thing. And that's where we look at self-determination theory, right? But we go into a place where it's like, oh, well, we want short-term conversions, like people need to fill this form. So then it's about, okay, maybe more black hat motivation with Black behavioral science, behavioral economy, and all that stuff would apply more. So I think overall, as you and I know, it's a very useful tool. We don't claim that it solves all the world's problems, but we claim that, hey, when we face a motivation challenge, it has been quote unquote instrumental as an instrument to help solve these problems.
Exactly. And I like what you said about the actionable element about it. And that's for me the main word you use in behavioral design. So when I train behavioral designers, I always emphasize that the actionable element of how we analyze information and what feedback and what do we do with that feedback, it has to be actionable. So if it's just theory related, I mean, that's cool. I like that. I'm a psychologist at the end. I like to theorize about many things, but you're not going to build a discipline and you're not going to build a business based on theories, right? Or based on what should happen if people did this. You have to actually build something that is useful, that people find it and say, oh, I can use this in this moment and the other. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can always polish it, but it has to be actionable. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yep. As we get close to wrapping up, you've been an OP member for about 5 months. What is your experience there in OP? And do you feel like you've learned more than, let's say, the book, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking about this with Mirta the other day. To be completely transparent, completely honest, I think I didn't convert to an OP for such a long time. I've been working with your framework like for 4 to 5 years. And I always like felt that I already like mastered it, right? Like so many years doing so many projects and like solving so many questions. And here in Latin America, not many people actually know that much about the framework. So here I'm like a bit of an expert on it. So I was like, yeah, I know this, like OP, like, I mean, how much more can there be? So as soon as I tried it out and I started looking at the medium and the advanced videos, I was like completely unaware that there was so much information that I was lacking, you know, like in-game techniques. And for example, in the game loop, I'm still struggling to actually design my first game loops. It's, even though I understand the framework, like a game loop it's a bit different and it's not easy. So there's so much information that I found there. And then I enjoy so much also the community, the Slack community. I love being in the OP sessions. I actually get angry when some client puts a meeting that you know doesn't allow me to actually be there, and it's been like a while, like 2 to 3 weeks like continuous with meetings. I was so angry because I really enjoy that space. I like the people that are there. It's so many good vibes and so many talented people. So that, and the other thing that I enjoy so much is actually living the gamification experience from the OP island, right? So at the beginning, I wasn't really sure what this experience was going to be like. It was like, okay, so I watched the videos, I earned coins, but I was kind of like, not at the beginning, I wasn't sure how this was really going to work, even though I understood what you were doing in terms of the model. For example, the geomons at the beginning, I wasn't sure, like geomons, it's like a Pokemon kind of thing, right? So I was like, is this really going to work? And then suddenly I just caught my first, I found the first geomon, and I felt this sense of, oh my god, there's a geomon. It's like, okay, I'm gonna play along, let's do this. I'll see you. I see what you're doing here, Yu-Kai. And I just captured it, and I felt this sense of, you know, achievement. And now I have this collection, and now I'm like, oh, do I have this geomon? Then I bought some cages, you know, the traps, and then I caught the trap, and then once I forgot to open the trap, so I lost the geomon. I was like so stressed out that I lost the trap, and then I just didn't notice I was already engaged in the game. So now every day I enter the island to open the chest and to search for geomons and to look at the videos. So it's really cool. And that's what I always say about behavioral design. It doesn't matter how much you know about this. It doesn't matter if you understand the Octalysis framework perfectly. You're always going to be able to have fun with it. I mean, even though I know that you're using this core drive here, it doesn't mean I'm not going to enjoy it. So that was a very interesting lesson, because when you're a consultant, you're constantly battling this idea in your head that you're not good enough, or that maybe you don't really know that much, or maybe this model is not going to work this time, maybe not with this client. So being able to live it in an environment where you thought it wasn't going to work and it did work, it gives you that sense of confidence, like saying, no, just like believe in the model, you're going to figure it out. So yeah, I mean, being an OP member is like a huge thing for me right now. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so good to hear. As you know, I poured a lot of heart and energy into this with my life coaching sessions because of the time zone thing. I always do it like around my midnight. So knowing that someone out there feels upset when a client meeting is on the same time, it gives me a lot of encouragement and motivation. So my CD5, feeling that, hey, people are appreciating what I do feels good. And I think what's interesting about the geomons, have you ever stumbled upon like a high tier geomon, but answer the question wrong and then so to escape before?
I have lost, yes. It wasn't like a high level, it was like a medium level, I think. And I missed it. And I did feel that, that loss aversion kind of sense, like, oh, I have to like train a little bit better. It actually also happens when I miss a question in the quiz, right? When I finish a video and I answered incorrectly, I kind of like, what happened there? So I have to go back to the video again. So it's really cool. It's really
so
cool.
Our video editor who will be editing this video, Howie, in the early days, he once stumbled upon the leprechaun, which is a mystical geomon, right? And there's only a 1% chance, 2 to 3 times a day possible that to stumble upon one. Legendary is, I think, 0.2%, but he stumbled upon it and then he answered the question around the leprechaun, like escape. And that was so devastating for him. And, even like 2-3 years out, he still remembers how sad he was and it made him want to study gamification better because he didn't want this to ever happen again. And he says later on, I captured more leprechauns and other mysticals and whatnot, but that first one that escaped will always like be in my mind. So
it's literally the one that got away, right? So
yeah. And you're totally right about having this knowledge doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Like I still get sucked into games. Like I'm really scared to start playing some game because I'd say like I'm unable to just play a game casually a little bit and leave. I'm like all or nothing, hardcore, or like, hey, I just completely have to separate from this thing. So I still enjoy this. And I see the game doing this stuff like, oh, look at the scarcity tactic. And I watch Netflix like, oh, look at that cliffhangers, like CD7 and 6 combined. But yeah, I think you get to, at least when you're aware of it, you get to choose how strongly you want to combat it. But, sometimes it's just, you enjoy doing it, it's fun and you just do it. So when you see these core drives, but you can play alongside it.
But, there is, I don't remember the name right now. There are like too many principles out there, but there is a psychology principle that maybe could help, not help, but make the other point. Like, for example, there is scientific evidence that if people actually, let's say, for example, people that study or understand how to appreciate wine, right? So they have all this training, all of this information on wine. So the more you understand something, the more language or the more nuances you understand of something, you enjoy it better. I think that happens with behavioral design. It's like, the more I'm aware of social influence or epic meaning and calling. So I appreciate now games even better, like, because I understand what they're doing. I appreciate it a lot more. I'm more sensitive on the art of not only the visuals, but on the gaming design. So I would say for me, it's the other way. I appreciate and I enjoy gaming more since I understand a little bit better, why is it that I am enjoying it? So I would go that way, like instead of thinking like, oh, now that I can enjoy a game because I know how they did it, right?
Yeah. With this knowledge, whenever I see like some advertisement billboard, I get to appreciate and enjoy it more when it's like, I think it's really well done. And I'm like, oh, taking a picture, like, oh, look, it's so clever, right? And I remember one that really caught my attention in Taiwan. There's like a famous, it's just like a milk drink store, like it's milk with like boba in it, but on top there's like the tag. Some of the after tagline says, "For you or because of you," depending on how you translate it. We raised a bunch of cows, and I'm like, oh, you did it all just for me. Then of course I have to buy it from you. You know, it's like a lot of CD4 and CD5. Like, oh, like you did it. You raised a bunch of all that trouble just for me. And if I don't buy this milk, you wasted all that effort.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, to be honest, what I do is when I play a game, I then analyze it with the Octalysis framework. So I have been in that situation so many times that I'm playing a game. I find a core drive, for example, that's been activated, and I just pause the game. I take out my cell phone and I type it, right? I have this keep worksheet where I just put everything I'm finding from the game. So it's just like, you know, you just have fun in another way. And you're always going to be, you know, a victim of whatever they're trying to do. I mean, whenever there's a Steam sale, I buy everything. And I know they're just using, you know, scarcity, and they're saying, oh yeah, this is like just today. And I don't care. I'm just a sucker for that. I just go and buy everything, even though I'm a behavioral designer.
Yeah. The guy on my team, Simon Duque, he's on my Octalysis group team. He used to be, well, he still is an OP member, but he started the OP and then he won a design challenge to join my team. He also does that. Every time there's a Steam sale, he buys it. He knows that he may never play the game, but he just wants it in his library. You know, he wants to collect all of it when it's like only $2. Yes, that's very similar. Carlos, thank you so much for being here, sharing your experience, sharing your knowledge, and just delighted to always hear about people liking the Octalysis framework and applying it to solve problems. Again, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you more in the community and in other live coaching sessions too.
Yeah, sure will. I mean, thank you so much for the invitation. This has been so exciting for me. And yeah, sharing whatever information I have. Everyone, you know, you're invited to contact me. I've been more than happy to share. I've actually been talking to so many of the members. So yeah.
And for the OP members that are watching, and thank you for watching this. We hope you have a great day. And I hope you apply that Octalysis framework to get just as much or even more than Carlos. From the OP Island and the framework, Carlos, you ready to prime out?
Oh yeah, I've been waiting for this since we started. So yeah,
all right, let's do this.
All right.
Prime.